Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gateways podcast, where we'll be delving further into our final episode on harmonic structure until near the end of the series. To let you know, this is Gateways number 8, and with Gateways 9, we'll be moving on to more rhythm, which it'll be a little more challenging, but I think it'll be a little more interesting, like challenging for me personally, because rhythm hasn't always been like my strong suit. I'm much more comfortable in harmonic environments because, I really adore harmony. I've taken a lot of time to study the theory behind it, but I think that doing this more challenging thing will actually prove to be pretty useful because, it means that, I'll kind of be learning with you, and yeah, it'll be fun. So let's just get started with today's topic, which is mainly just going to be really delving into some of the finer theory, because I know with a lot of the stuff that I've talked about with harmony, right? I've given you a lot of like what harmony is and like its components, like triadic harmony, sevenths, tensions, what exactly even is pitch. I've even done entire segments on, how do you develop your own harmonic structure, but I haven't given you a lot of information on how harmony is utilized in terms of like creating a progression. Because I remember last time I talked a lot about how like creating a progression is entirely subjective and up to a lot to like the ear, or when you're doing like story type arranging, deciding what kind of feeling you want, or like using other chord progressions in your music to see if it works. But today I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into the actual theoretical side of it, in terms of like theoretical harmony. And it's going to be kind of like a quick overview kind of thing. If you want to learn more about it, then a lot of it's going to be like self-teaching research and experimentation, which is why I'm not going to be playing these. And the reason why I'm not going to play them is because if I play them, then that means you won't play them yourselves. And I think that playing them yourself is very important so that you can, one, get used to actually playing these different harmonic structures, and two, so that you can hear for yourself what it sounds like. It's like it's another level of understanding, because not only do you hear it, you have to interact with it. So just start off, we have diatonic harmony. Now what's diatonic? It's, all your chords are in the key. So if you're in the key of C major, that means that the diatonic chords of that key, which in total are 7, would be C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and then B diminished. Those are the diatonic chords of that key. Now, when you're using diatonic harmony, any diatonic chord can go to any diatonic chord. It's like the thing that actually distinguishes how it moves is depending on the root. And this is called root motion, and there are 3 categories. You have like down in fifths, or along the circle of fifths. You have down in fourths, and you also have things like going in stepwise, or you could go in like thirds. There are a lot of different ways of doing it. Fifths is one of the more like strongest root motions. Like I said previously, if you moved only along the circle of fifths throughout a key, then it would be like a very powerful resolution, like going from A to D to G to C. Those are all technically, if you like went an actual descending along a piano, those would all be fifths apart, or in this case, kind of fourths. But fourths and fifths are kind of inversions of one another. But it's very powerful resolution. Fourths are also very powerful resolutions. It's not as strong as a fifth. You also have like what is stepwise. It's just meaning that like, you're moving stepwise according to the chord in like resolving. It's a little more subtle than the root motion of fourths and fifths, but it's still interesting. You also have like movement by thirds, right? And you have to keep in mind that if you're doing something like a root motion, it's a repeating pattern, so you can't really just stop doing root motion. Normally, if you want to stop it, you have to end on the one chord. So that's how you go about doing it. Like if you're in G, say G major, and you're moving in thirds, so you'd go like G to E minor to C to A minor to like G to B minor to A minor to C to E minor to D sus4, and then resolve that to G, and then you'd kind of end the sequence of root motion. Now, I just said a D sus4 or a 5 sus4. What is a sus4 chord? Well, in the case of that one, which is a 5/7 sus4, it's a very powerful resolution because it's the root motion of a perfect fifth down. Because it doesn't contain a tritone, its function is mainly dependent on the context, but it's a very powerful resolution. It's built on the fifth, because it's a 5 sus4, and because it's a sus4, that means it doesn't have a third. It has a fourth instead. So, for example, if you had a C7 sus4, that would be C F G, and if it's a standard 7, that's a B flat. So C F G B flat. And there are different ways of utilizing sustained fourth chords. One of the ways you can use them is if you play, like, let's just say C sus4. You can go from C sus4 to C major really nicely because there's like a bit of tension with the fourth in there until you move to the third down a half step, which resolves that tension. And along, like, they're very common. They're very common in like contemporary tunes, definitely. And then now, moving on from this sus4 idea, it's important to know how to categorize all of the different chords. And you can kind of categorize them diatonic in one of three categories. You have tonic, which are the 1, 3 minor, and the 4 minor. You have the subdominant, which are the 2 minor and the 4, and you have the dominant, which are the 5 and the 6 diminished. Yeah, 6 diminished. And what's the importance of this? Well, something that's very useful is like if you're doing anything that has to do with reharmonization, understanding that what categories each of these chords fit into is important. For example, you're reharmonizing a diatonic melody. Well, if you look at the chords as they're currently present, then you can say, oh, okay, so we have a tonic followed by a subdominant followed by a dominant to tonic to subdominant to dominant, etc. Well, knowing that, you can be like, okay, I'm going to change this tonic chord with this other tonic chord in the same category, which, because of that, you now have you have a different chord underneath, but it still serves the same function. Now, this is, of course, in functional diatonic harmony. Now, what's important? Well, one, when you swap them, the root motion wouldn't be the same, even if the melodic line is the same. The melody must be compatible with the reharmonization choices, and the original resolutions will probably end up being altered because you changed what chords are actually present. So that's important to keep in mind if you're doing anything reharmonization. It's also important to keep in mind the actual functionality of all of the different chords that you have at your disposal if you're using diatonic harmony. And if you're able to categorize them, then you're able to properly use them where they would be the most effective. Now, next we're going to move on to cadence. So what is a cadence? It's a melodic or harmonic movement to rest. So it's tension to rest. There are two very common types of cadence. You have dominant cadence and you have the subdominant cadence. Now, dominant cadence is is like a 5-to-1. That would be good. If you do it you can go from the tonic to the dominant to tonic to dominant to tonic to dominant to tonic to dominant to tonic, and they would continuously resolve itself because tonic to dominant is a dominant cadence. It's very powerful and it's very common. throughout virtually all of music around the world, throughout music history. It's been present. And then subdominant is the same effect. You can go tonic to subdominant to tonic to subdominant to tonic, and just keep repeating that pattern, and it will continue to resolve. Not as powerfully, but it will still resolve. Now, a dominant cadence is often called a perfect cadence because of its power, like the power behind it, and the fact that it's present in virtually all musical cultures. And the subdominant cadence is often called a plagal cadence. So those are just important to keep in mind. If you hear those terms, that's what they mean. Now, if you do like subdominant to tonic, that's a full cadence, because all the functional sound groups, the key, are represented. Like if you did a 4 to 5 to 1, that's a traditional full cadence. You also do 2-5-1, which is a very common jazz chord progression, because of the way it actually ends up resolving. You also have, like, if you did like a 4 to 5 sus4, there would be like no tritone, so there's another possible resolution route. You have like 4 to 4 over the dominant root to 1, so that would be like, if you're in the key of, let's say, G, so you have a C to a what's called a slash chord. In this case, it's a C over D, which basically means you play C major over D as a bass note, as like the root note of that chord, essentially. So you play like D, C, E, G, and then you can resolve that down to 1, which is a G. You have the 2-7 to 5-7 to 1. Very strong because the root motion is all in perfect fifths. This is what I talked about before. A lot of contemporary music uses it, a lot of jazz uses it, etc. Now, what's next after this? Well, it's time to go into a little bit more explanation as to what are those different smaller subsets. So you already have your tonic and your dominant, which they resolve very nicely with one another, and your tonic is your root, the third and the fourth, and the dominant is the 5 and the 6, I believe. So now it's time to go a little bit more in depth into secondary dominance. So strongest characteristic of dominant resolution is the root motion down a perfect fifth. So if you're in C, G7 to C is the primary dominant, but you also have secondary dominants, right, which are different. So basically, if you resolve something, if you're in the key of C and you resolve from one chord down a perfect fifth, but you're not going to the tonic, then that's a secondary dominant. So like B7 to E minor 7, C7 to F major 7, E7 to A minor 7. All of those, it's a perfect fifth root motion, but it's not to the tonic, so it's a secondary dominant. And a dominant chord resolution can be to any quality of a chord, a perfect fifth lower, except for a diminished seventh. That's because a diminished seventh directly contains a tritone within the chord itself, so it's not actually commonly used. And then that means like resolution, the chord of resolution can be used in any diatonic chord in a major or minor key. Now, a secondary dominant. Now, something to keep in mind: all secondary dominants have common characteristics. One is that they are not diatonic structures, right? So if you're using not the concept of like grouping of secondary dominant, if you're using a secondary dominant resolution, at least one chord is not in the key. That's important to keep in mind. They're expected to resolve a diatonic chord a perfect fifth below. They are built upon a diatonic root, which is important to keep in mind. Now, why is something like 5-7 over 7 in a major key omitted? Well, it's because the root, a perfect fifth above a 7, 7 minor 7, 5, is not diatonic. That's why it's not there, because it doesn't resolve diatonically in the root, which is why you can't use it as a secondary dominant if you're still somewhat using diatonic harmony. Although it's a non-diatonic structure, it can be used in diatonic harmony, and that's important to keep in mind. And again, you have like the tensions that are present. You can use a lot of like non-chord tones that are diatonic, so you have like major ninths. So there are exceptions. The flat 9 is available on dominant chords, is diatonic. Flat 13 is available on dominant chords if it's diatonic. And then the flat 9 and sharp 9 can coexist on the same dominant chord if either or both is diatonic to the key. So important to keep in mind. And that's kind of like a quick crash course on like all of the nuances of basic rhythm. I'm talking basic here. We're probably gonna like still talk about harmony a little bit when we go into the section on rhythm, because there are things like harmonic rhythm. And then also when we're going into rhythm, we'll be talking a lot about like melodic lines too. So harmony will be involved in that. We'll probably further discuss harmonic, like certain points of resolution and how it actually applies to rhythm. We'll be doing some melodic analysis because it fits with rhythm. We'll also be going into like, rhythm itself. What is rhythm? How is it used? We'll be going into things like percussion, because that's an important facet of rhythm. You'll have like the creation of movement in the root and how exactly you want to implement that. If you want a certain feel in your music, that's just important to keep in mind. You'll have things like passing tones, approach notes, pedal points, that kind of thing, because a common misconception: rhythm is not only drums. Rhythm is a lot of things. Rhythm is how you even decide to, like, the duration in which you decide to hold a note. That's a part of rhythm. So we're going to be going into a lot of that, and I think it'll be good. It'll let you have some more complex rhythmic ideas in your pieces. Now, this is kind of the end of the entire section on harmonic structure. Now, although I'm kind of sad that it's over, I'm happy that we'll get to dive further into more complex topics, and harmony will still crop up here and there, like I said before, because it has to. But, I think this was a fun section to make, and I look forward to making more. There's no assignment this time. Just be prepared for the coming podcast on defining rhythm and what exactly it is. So with that, I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening in.